Consoles that are mind-blowingly good, light years ahead of their time, and capable of revolution.
I want you to think of your top 5 NES launch titles you had when you were a kid. I want you to think of your top 5 NES launch titles you had when you were a kid. Of course, you'd immediately name classics like Super Mario Brothers, Duck Hunt, or Excitebike. But I'd be willing to bet that Kung Fu made your list too, because I can't think of a single person I knew that had an NES growing up that didn't own this game. Kung Fu is one of the true pioneers of the beat-em-up genre. The story behind its development and inclusion in the NES library is quite compelling, and I can't wait to share all the secrets and history you need to become a Kung Fu NES master. Let's get started. If this is your first time here at the channel, my name is Tyler, and if you love gaming from all generations like we do here at G3, then consider hitting that subscribe button and hit that bell for notifications so you don't miss anything. October 18th, 1985. The NES was officially released in North America, breathing new life into the dying home video game console market. Kung Fu was one of more than a dozen NES launch titles available that day, but it and one other game were different than the rest of these original classics. Kung Fu and 10-Yard Fight were the only two launch titles that weren't originally developed by Nintendo, making them the first third-party NES games. Both games were developed by Irem, but we all know 10-Yard Fight would be a tough Secrets in History video to watch, and that game should be thankful we spoke of it at all in this video. My buddy NES Complex has a great video discussing some of the black box titles in his collection, and this was the real inspiration for making Kung Fu our next Secrets in History video. I'll put a link in the description if you want to check out that video later. On the surface, Kung Fu seems like a basic game of kicking and punching your way through bad guys and feels generic by today's standards. But that is far from the truth. Kung Fu is actually a port of Irem's 1984 Japanese arcade hit Spartan X, which was titled Kung Fu Master when it was distributed by Data East in North America. The Japanese version, Spartan X, was named after the 1984 Jackie Chan film of the same name, which was internationally released by Wheels on Meals. The only real connections the game has to the Spartan X movie are the names of the hero you control named Thomas and his kidnapped girlfriend Sylvia. The game is primarily based on the 1972 Bruce Lee movie Game of Death, which features Lee fighting his way through a multi-tiered pagoda called the Devil's Temple, battling a martial arts master on each of the levels before climbing a wooden staircase to the next challenge. The only reason the game was titled Spartan X was because Irem had obtained the license from Paragon Films. Kung Fu Master was designed by Takashi Nishiyama, who had already developed the 1982 arcade shooter Moon Patrol, and would later work at Capcom and co-create the Street Fighter franchise in 1987. The creator of the iconic Mario and Zelda NES themes, Koji Kondo, composed the music for Kung Fu as well. Nintendo ported Spartan X to the Japanese Famicom in June of 1985. Now, there were many ports of Kung Fu Master, but I feel the Famicom and NES versions stay the most true to the original arcade game. Kung Fu puts you in control of martial arts master Thomas, who must make his way through 5 levels and bosses of the temple to rescue Sylvia, who is being held captive by the leader of the gang who kidnapped her, Mr. X. We don't get much background as to why Mr. X abducted Sylvia, but I did happen to stumble upon an unexpected connection that Mr. X has to another game in the Nintendo universe. Now, I was too young to remember this show, but on the weekends in the early 80s, the cartoon Saturday Supercade aired on CBS and was based on several popular arcade titles at the time. One episode, titled Greenhouse Gorilla, centered around Donkey Kong, with Mario and Pauline chasing after the giant ape who tries to hide away in a nursery operated by Stanley the Bugman, who we all know is the protagonist in Donkey Kong 3. But there is also a thief lurking in a nursery trying to steal Stanley's special carnivorous plant named Herman. And that thief has a big nose, wears a black vest, and just so happens to be named Mr. X. I mean, I'm pretty convinced it's the same character, and it was cool to find another reference to one of Nintendo's most obscure final bosses. Let's cover Kung Fu's basic gameplay. You have the choice of Game A or B at the title screen, with Game B posing more of a challenge for advanced players. The controls are straightforward, with the A button used to throw punches and you press the B button to deliver kicks. Jump by pressing up on the D-pad to avoid low objects and enemies. Pair this jumping with a punch or kick for extra powerful and point-grabbing attacks. The most common enemy you'll face is the Gripper. These guys love to gang up on Thomas and will latch on with a big bear hug if they get close to you. And you'll have to tap left and right on the D-pad quickly to get away from them, but they can easily be taken out by one hit. Next is the Knife Thrower, who will toss knives at your head or feet and can be killed with 2 hits. The final common enemies you encounter are those annoying Tom-Toms. These little guys can only be hit in the crouching position and act mostly like grippers, but they occasionally perform flips to try to bounce off Thomas's head. The official Nintendo Player's Guide shares a secret tip that you can press up on the D-pad to counter the flipping Tom-Tom. But getting the timing of this move down takes some practice. And if you're trying to rack up a high score, defeating enemies with punches are more difficult to pull off and worth more points than kicks. The Nintendo Player's Guide shares an odd secret to collect some easy bonus points, and it works on any stage in Kung Fu. When you start a new level, keep count of the number of enemies you kill. If the 12th enemy you kill is a gripper defeated with a jump kick, you will get an extra 5,000 points. This is important since once you earn 50,000 points, you get an extra life. Now that we have the basics covered, let's discuss the pro tips needed to master each level and boss fight in Kung Fu. Each of the 5 stages are broken into 6 sections, with the boss battle taking place after you see this symbol. The first stage is made up of only gripper and knife throwing enemies. My first pro tip is to always keep advancing forward when an enemy is chasing behind you. Wait until the last second that you can turn around and strike him. Changing direction and pursuing an enemy behind you will more than likely lead to more trouble, with enemies overwhelming you from both sides. Once you reach the first boss, the stick fighter, the key is getting as close as you can to fight him, rendering his stick attacks useless. I like to strike first with a jump kick and get in close and take him down quickly, with either low kicks or kneeling punches. Stage 2 begins with some of the most annoying obstacles in the game that fall from the ceiling and attack Thomas through the first 4 sections of the level. The X-Mark Dragon Balls produce fire-breathing dragons that can easily be avoided by keeping your distance or ducking below the high fireball. But one of the secret points in the Nintendo Player's Guide says you can defeat the dragon if you attack before he breathes fire to land you a quick 2,000 points. I'm not sure why this was considered a secret because it was included in the manual as well. Confetti balls will appear and hover over your head for a few seconds. Just make sure to keep your distance to avoid the projectiles when they explode. The green baskets produce snakes that run along the floor to bite Thomas, and you must jump over the snakes to avoid damage because no attacks do damage to the snakes. After the 4th section, you only have to deal with grippers, tom-toms, and knife throwers, and you'll be at the boomerang fighter boss in no time. Just try to avoid his first 2 boomerang attacks, move in close like you did with the stick fighter, and you'll have plenty of time to land multiple hips and even jump attacks to defeat this guy. The 3rd stage is set up similar to the first, only with the addition of tom-toms. The 3rd boss is named the Giant, and was originally based on Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's character in Game of Death, which is better portrayed in the arcade version. But the NES version presents a more stocky, muscle-bound sprite of this character. The Giant's attacks deal a lot of damage, so the key to taking him down is landing an initial forward jump kick to land you close to the Giant, and immediately light him up with a flurry of crouching punches to defeat him before he does much damage to Thomas. Although sometimes I attack with low sweeping kicks to take his health down and finish him off with a jump kick. Either way seems to work pretty well. The 4th stage introduces the poisonous moths that you encounter in the first 3 sections of the level. The best way to counter these enemies is by simply avoiding them and advancing to the 4th section as quick as possible, but you'll occasionally have to punch or kick one of the faster moths that get near Thomas. The last few sections give you a bit of a breather before you battle the Black Magician. I struggle with this boss the most since his patterns are unpredictable. In my experience, he mostly throws high fireballs, so I'm always ready to duck and get in as close as possible. Any kick or punch to the face takes this guy's head off, which I always found a little disturbing as a kid. So when you do move in close, you have to crouch and deliver only kneeling punches to win this fight. The 5th stage is not very difficult, and feels much like the 1st and 3rd stages, so you shouldn't have much trouble at this point. And if you were expecting a challenging fight with the final boss, Mr. X, then you're gonna be disappointed. All you have to do is get close enough to him to deliver continuous low sweeping kicks, and this glitches Mr. X's brain, and you'll defeat him with no damage taken at all. and finally save your precious Sylvia. Although your happiness won't continue long, as the game loops back to begin another round of the 5 stages if you're up to the challenge. If you do beat the game a second time, there is a subtle alternate ending, with the heart surrounding Thomas and Sylvia on the end screen now arranged in the shape of a giant heart. Yeah, not worth it. And speaking of not being worth it, I found multiple sources stating that defeating the game 50 times allows you to fight Sylvia in the final battle. And I was planning on beating the game 50 times to prove this until I came across a statement in my Family Computer 1983 to 1994 book that reads, "I guess there were a lot of people who actually believe that Sylvia will attack you if you go around the mansion 24 times," which was actually a hoax from the Japanese comic Famicom Rocky. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Kung Fu, but I'm glad I didn't have to play through it 50 times to find out this was an urban legend. Irem originally planned for an arcade follow-up to Kung Fu Master called Super Kung Fu Master, but it never panned out. Instead, they released Vigilante in 1988, which is considered a sister title to Kung Fu Master, with a similar style and gameplay, except this time it takes place in New York City with a different cast of characters. An official sequel for Spartan X was released for the Famicom in the fall of 1991 in Japan, and many American gaming magazines hyped the soon-to-be-released Kung Fu 2 for the NES, but for some reason the game was cancelled, and I was never able to find a solid explanation. Sequel or no sequel, Kung Fu leaves behind a solid legacy on the NES, with it being the 13th best-selling NES game of all time, with 3.5 million copies sold. It even outperformed Mike Tyson's Punch-Out and Metroid, and that speaks volumes to its place in retro history. I want to hear your favorite memories and secrets you have about Kung Fu that I may have missed in the comments below. Please give this video a like, and I want to give special shout outs to Master Search and Soapy Papoose for finding Mullet Boy first at almost exactly the same time in our last video. Strong work, you two. Till next time, guys. G3 out. Think of your top 5 NES launch titles you had when you were a kid. Of course, was nothing like turning on the TV after a long day at school to find Uncle Scrooge swimming through his money bin while blasting that unforgettable DuckTales theme song. And Capcom's NES platformer based on Disney's hit animated series captures the essence of the show while shattering all expectations for a licensed NES title, making it one of the most iconic games ever released on the system. Today we're going to uncover all of the secrets and history you need to master DuckTales on the NES. Let's get started. If this is your first time here at the channel, my name is Tyler, and if you love gaming from all generations like we do here at G3, then consider hitting that subscribe button and hit that bell for notifications so you don't miss anything. The late 80s were a great time to be a kid. Nintendo had revitalized the gaming industry with the NES, and Disney had just begun its renaissance with hit movies like The Little Mermaid and its after-school cartoon lineup, headlined by the adventures of the richest duck in the world and his nephew sidekicks in DuckTales. So when Capcom and Disney agreed to join forces and create NES games, DuckTales was the perfect springboard to launch this partnership. Fun fact, even though DuckTales was the first Disney title Capcom developed themselves, Mickey Mousecapade was actually the first Disney title Capcom ported to the NES in the fall of 1988, even though the game was originally developed and released by Hudson Soft in 1987 for the Japanese Famicom. Now let's get back to DuckTales. DuckTales was developed by many key players behind the success of the Mega Man series, such as producer Takuro Fujiwara, character designer Keiji Inafune, and sound programmer Yoshihiro Sakaguchi. Their premise for the game centers around the ever-greedy Scrooge McDuck traveling the globe collecting treasures with the help of his three nephews Huey, Dewey, and Louie, Webby, Mrs. Beakley, and Launchpad McQuack. You take control of Scrooge to acquire the most expensive rarities in perilous levels so you can finally outwit your nemesis Flintheart Glomgold and stake your claim as the world's richest duck. DuckTales was released for the NES in North America on September 14th, which is actually my birthday, by the way, in the late summer of 1989. It later launched in Japan in January of 1990 and made its way to Europe on December 14th. Let me just say that I love the design of the Capcom Disney titles. The royal purple along with the flawless Disney artwork was immediately recognized behind any game encounter when I was a kid. The back of the box shows some nice in-game screenshots, and thankfully DuckTales is endorsed by Capcom's mascot and answer to Konami man, Captain Commando. Another fun fact, this version of Captain Commando standing in front of a fighter jet with an alien perched on his shoulder can also be found on the packaging of other 1989 Capcom titles, like Strider, Willow, and Mega Man 2. I also believe this version of the Captain may have been influenced by Michael Jackson's Captain EO 3D movie at Disney theme parks that opened in 1986 and featured the King of Pop as the captain of a spaceship who has an alien sidekick named Fuzzball who likes to sit on his shoulder. Now let's dive into DuckTales' basic gameplay and controls. You have the choice of 3 difficulty levels allowing for challenging replay opportunities. You feel some strong Mega Man vibes when you start the game in the control room where you have the choice to start your journey in one of 5 lands. The Amazon, where the manual states Uncle Scrooge must search through the ruins of the Incan Empire to obtain the scepter of the Incan King. In Transylvania, he must battle ghosts and monsters in a cryptic haunted house while passing through magic mirrors to bring home the coin of the lost realm. Uncle Scrooge prefers his top hat over a fedora when navigating the African mines, in search of the great diamond of the inner earth. The treacherous snowy terrain of the Himalayas proves to be quite the challenge for Scrooge and his pogo jump, but he must find a way to get the crown of Genghis Khan back home to Duckburg. The 5th land takes place on the moon, where Scrooge McDuck must explore every inch of a UFO to snatch a piece of the green cheese of longevity. But before you start exploring these lands, let's discuss how to properly control Uncle Scrooge. He only has one weapon to assist him through the game, and that is his trusty walking cane. Scrooge can hit objects or enemies with his cane in 2 ways. The first is the golf swing attack, where you hold the D-pad right or left in order to get up against an object, and then hit the B button to execute the swing. The second attack takes a little bit of a knack to master, and that is the pogo jump. Scrooge's pogo jump is the first thing that pops in my mind when I think of the game, and I feel this unique attack is one of the main reasons DuckTales is such a memorable title on the NES. Let's cover the items and bonuses you encounter. The most common items you find are diamonds. The smaller diamonds are worth $2,000, the large diamonds are worth $10,000, and the large red diamonds are worth $50,000. What is strange is there is no direct reward for collecting this money like extra lives, but there are a few hidden secrets that I'll talk about later that makes it worth your while to collect as much money as possible. The next item you may find are magic coins, which will make Scrooge invincible for a short time. But if you're playing on the difficult setting, you'll never see any of these coins. There are 2 items which replenish Scrooge's health. The first is ice cream, which restores 1 hit point, and the second is cake that will refill all hit points. Next up are those creepy looking Scrooge dolls you can find for extra lives. Seriously, I don't know why, but these things freak me out. Now, before we discuss the best secrets and strategies for DuckTales, did you know there was a beta version of the game that nearly made it to store shelves back in 1989? You can see the differences in some of the gameplay screenshots from the 1990 book Consumer Guide, Hot Tips for the Coolest Nintendo Games, and another magazine which I own called the NES Game Atlas Player's Guide. The lands had mostly generic names in the beta version like the Jungle, Ghost House, and Underground. And the coffins in Transylvania originally had crosses on them, which of course didn't make it past the final Nintendo censors, and were replaced with the RIP lettering. Hamburgers were the items you collected to replenish your health, but thankfully the developers changed it to Scrooge's favorite food, ice cream. The alien enemies on the moon were originally characters that had no direct ties to the DuckTales cartoons, but the developers ultimately redesigned the aliens to resemble Overlord Bolivan, found in the episode Where No Duck Has Gone Before. Now I'm going to reveal the top secrets and strategies you can use to make your way through DuckTales. I own a few books that share some great tips and maps to help you through this wonderful game, but I believe the September 1989 issue of Nintendo Power is the perfect guide to have by your side playing DuckTales. It has a beautifully designed 12-page layout that covers each land and has detailed maps showing critical item locations. The first 2 pages share some general knowledge that is also covered in the manual, but it also discusses jumping around to find hidden treasure. Seriously, make sure you pogo jump around everywhere, because odds are you'll find some hidden diamonds. This magazine was also where I first found out about 2 hidden treasures, like the $1 million ring, not to be confused with the $1 million belt, and the second treasure is the gold plate, which are each worth $1 million. And if you want to get even more treasure, when you run into Launchpad during a level, you can hitch a ride back to the control room and re-enter that level to play it again and collect more money. Another bizarre way to get your money total up is finding the bonus stage. You can only reach the bonus stage if you ask Launchpad to take you to the control room when there is a 7 in the 10,000s digit location. Launchpad will drop Scrooge off in the clouds and you can follow behind Gyro, Gear Loose, flying a plane and dropping a large supply of diamonds for you to pick up. Now here is why you should collect as much money as possible in DuckTales. Nintendo Power reveals there are 3 different endings to the game based on how much money you bring home, saying the size of the money piles in the end scene change depending on how much treasure Scrooge collects. They don't give any more specifics, but here are the 3 different endings and how much money you need to see them. The first and easiest ending to see is finishing the game with less than $10 million, and you'll find Scrooge celebrating beside a treasure chest full of gold. But if you manage to grab more than $10 million worth of treasure, you will get the best ending, with Scrooge sitting on top of a giant heap of gold wearing a crown. The third ending is really tough to pull off, and that is to finish the game with $0. Now, going through this entire game and not collecting a single diamond or treasure is virtually impossible, so that isn't how it's done. Did you know there is a secret way to replenish your health that the manual or Nintendo Power never mentions? For the low price of $3 million, you can press the select button to refill your life meter, but it plays a key role in ending the game with no money. You must have your total money at an exact multiple of $3 million, like 3, 6, or $9 million. That way you can perfectly spin down to 0 in the last level before you take down the final boss. Then you get to see the third ending screen where Scrooge stands alone and penniless with the hopes of using his newfound treasures to help him rebuild his empire. But first you have to make it through the 5 worlds and their bosses to get to these endings. So let's discuss some pro tips for each level. Let's cover the Amazon first. Here's a screenshot of the map and path to the boss, and make note of the 2 Scrooge doll locations highlighted here in Nintendo Power to give you 2 additional lives. The first thing I recommend before you make your way through the level underground is to head right a few screens from the start and climb up the 4th vine from the left to a hidden room above where you can grab 2 red diamonds. Climb back down and walk left to find the vine that leads you underground where you will see a stone statue on your left. Use your golf swing to knock the red barrel next to the statue, so you can pogo jump onto the statue and find a hidden room to the left. Once you collect the treasure in this room, jump left again at the top of the stairs and walk across the ceiling to the left to find another room full of loot. After fighting off a few spear-throwing enemies, you will find another stone statue who demands you pay $300,000 to pass through him. Just ignore this and don't waste your money. You can head back to the left real fast to lure one of those spear-throwing guys underneath the vine at the top of the screen so you can pogo off of him to grab the vine and to watch Scrooge swagger his way to the final boss's lair in the Shrine of the Silver Monkey. Wait a minute, wrong show. Sorry on that. The boss's real name is actually the Incan King, and he is definitely the easiest boss in the game. Now there is a shortcut to the boss before you get to the area with the stone statue if you are pressed for time, and it's in this section here with you pogo jumping off another spear enemy to reach a vine in the top left of the screen. Make your way down the other vine and you will drop in the boss's lair. The Incan King's pattern of jumping is very predictable, and all you have to do is jump right before he hits the ground and pogo jump off the top of his head a few times and you'll defeat him in no time, and reveal the scepter of the Incan King. Up next is Transylvania. Here are the map and Scrooge doll locations you need, and you can tell this map is a little more complicated than the Amazon. There are 8 warp mirrors in Transylvania, and Nintendo Power made a quick reference warp chart for you. Make your way to the right and down to begin the level, grabbing treasure along the way until you reach Mirror G. Once you pass through Mirror G, you will start at Mirror A near the beginning of the level. Speak to Webby real quick and she will tell you Huey has been kidnapped. Make your way up the rope to the right of Webby to knock out one of the Beagle Boys to save Huey, who lets you know this house has an illusion wall. But there is really more than just one illusion wall. You'll find the first wall in this location, where you can walk through the wall next to the top of the coffin to find a secret life meter container, which will now give you a total of 4 HP instead of 3 when playing on the difficult setting. Head back through the wall and up the rope to work through Mirror B on the right side of the screen. You'll come out at Mirror E and make your way forward in a fun minecart sequence. Continue to explore and collect as much treasure as you can, eventually making your way back to the same room Mirror B was located earlier. But this time pass through an illusion wall underneath Mirror B to find 2 mirrors side by side. Go through Mirror D on the right to bring you to Mirror H, which makes it a short walk to the left to battle this stage's boss, Magica Dispel. For whatever reason, I have a little trouble beating Magica, as her pattern is a little less predictable than the other bosses. When she is in her flying phase, she mostly hovers too high to land a pogo jump attack, but she will occasionally fly low enough that you can capitalize on that. Otherwise, just try to stay as close to her as possible, and as soon as she descends to the ground, pogo jump over and behind her to avoid her lightning attacks, and finally get your hands on the coin of the Lost Realm. The African Mines is the next area to explore. Just when you thought you were finished with Transylvania, you need to go back and pick up the skeleton key to unlock the mine. Luckily, it's a short trip to the key. Quickly jump through the mirror you see just to the right of the beginning of the level, grab the key and head through the other mirror to get back to the control room and go back to the African Mines. Here are the map and Scrooge doll locations, but this level holds one of the $1 million hidden treasures we discussed earlier. Make your way to this section of the map where Mrs. Beakley is located. Make sure you let her carbo load you up on some ice cream to fill your health before you pogo jump over a few enemies to make your way over to the giant chest that holds the hidden treasure, the $1 million ring. Head a couple screens to the left of Mrs. Beakley to walk through a hidden wall to easily find one of the Scrooge 1-Up dolls. The other location of the Scrooge doll is tricky to get to as well, as you need to pogo jump to reveal a few chests that you can spring off of to make your way to the hidden room on the left and grab the doll. And did anyone else ever notice Scrooge's heel turn in the minecart sequence as he just tramples his nephews and lets them plummet to their deaths? This is Uncle Scrooge's greed at its finest. Continue making your way to the end of the level to fight the king of the Terra Firmes, who curls into a ball to attack. Wait until he starts rolling to quickly jump to the center of the room, then to the next ledge to wait for the king to reappear in the center so you can pogo off his head. Then immediately jump to a nearby ledge to anticipate where he rolls next. Just keep repeating this pattern to be rewarded with the giant diamond of the inner earth. It's now time for one of the more frustrating levels, the Himalayas. Here are the map and Scrooge doll locations. What makes this level tough is that your cane gets stuck in the snow and you have to be accurate with your pogo jumps to bounce off of enemies. The first part of this level is pretty straightforward, so just make your way to the last section of the map on the right and fall down through the false snowbank to find your first Scrooge doll. Then find your way to this location of the map where the duck is trapped inside a block of ice. After freeing him from the ice, he will show you a secret cave that contains the second life container to bring you up to a max of 5 HP if you are playing on the difficult setting. Don't miss the secret room you can get to by bouncing off one of the Beagle Boys and heading left to grab a red diamond. Now it's just a quick walk to the right to find the abominable snowman. I have no doubt you can beat him in one try, because all you have to do is dodge the boulders falling from the sky and pogo jump off of him immediately after. Now open up that chest to claim the crown of Genghis Khan. Let's travel to our fifth land, the moon. Make sure you grab the last hidden treasure, the golden plate, in this section of the map for a quick $1 million. And there are a few tricky jumps you have to make to get there, but it's definitely worth it if you're trying for that high score ending. Now climb your way to the top left corner of the spaceship to get the UFO key so you can now have access to this section of the ship where you can grab the remote control to call for Gizmo Duck to blast away the wall guarding the entrance to the boss. But if you are running low on health, make sure you jump above the location of the remote control to get some ice cream from Mrs. Beakley. Now make your way back to the green wall where one of your nephews told you to call for Gizmo Duck and let him take care of that obstacle for you. Drop down and pogo your way over some Beagle Boys to face off against Lunarat. Just always try to keep the high ground on Lunarat and you'll put him away easily. Then you can grab a slice of the green cheese of longevity. Once back in the control room, somehow Scrooge's arch nemesis, Flintheart Glumgold, snatches all 5 of your treasures and takes them back to Dracula Duck Manor in Transylvania. Use the same path to make it to the boss's lair through the false wall and warp mirror you used when you fought Magica earlier. This time Dracula Duck will be waiting for the final showdown. Be patient and don't jump until the bat flying next to Dracula Duck gets close enough for you to pogo jump off of and hit the boss. Repeat this pattern until he's defeated. Then Glumgold ultimately appears and you must race him to the top of the tower to take back all of your treasures and remain the wealthiest duck in the world. DuckTales has left a powerful legacy with innumerable highly praised reviews. IGN ranks it as the 10th best NES game of all time in its 100 greatest NES games list, and Nintendo Power ranks it 44th in its list of the all of those retro buddy films like Bill and Ted and Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So what do you get when you combine the essence of an 80s buddy film with the genius of programmer David Crane? You get the classic but not too often discussed NES puzzle adventure A Boy and His Blob. And you don't want to miss all the secret pro tips and history I'm going to share in this video. Let's get started. If this is your first time here at the channel, my name is Tyler, and if you love gaming from all generations like we do here at G3, then consider hitting that subscribe button and hit that bell for notifications so you don't miss anything. A Boy and His Blob, Trouble on Blobolonia is definitely not your traditional NES adventure. You take control of a kid whose actual character name is Boy, who comes to the aid of his shape-shifting sidekick named Blobbert to help him save his home planet Blobolonia. The game starts out on Earth in the ever-so-advanced 21st century, and the manual tells you it's now commonplace for kids to have a buddy from outer space. The duo makes it their mission to save Blobbert's planet from the evil Emperor Blob. So, the Emperor is cruel to his people and forces everyone to eat marshmallows and chocolate. No offense, but this guy doesn't really sound that bad. So Blobbert and the boy have to collect money on Earth to buy vitamins cause the healthy supplements are actually poisonous to the Emperor. And lucky for you, your friend the Blob is actually a shapeshifter who can transform into various items to help you along your quest, like a ladder, bridge, or trampoline, just to name a few. And just exactly how does Blobbert do all that shapeshifting? Well, it turns out that Blobbert loves jelly beans. And these aren't just any old jelly beans.
These are extraordinary jelly beans.
Anytime Blobbert is given a different flavored jelly bean, he changes shape and helps he and the boy make it through otherwise impossible situations. Now you have to admit, this is a pretty bold and unique premise for an adventure game in the late 80s. But when you realize who the creative force behind A Boy and His Blob, David Crane, is, you'll realize he's no stranger to marching into unknown territory in the gaming industry. David Crane is an American video game programmer who started his career at Atari in the 70s making games for the Atari 2600. Crane, along with his co-worker and fellow Atari programmer Alan Miller, became increasingly frustrated with the lack of recognition Atari gave to its programmers when creating a game. They ultimately left Atari in 1979 and co-founded Activision, which is still recognized as the first third-party video game developer and remains a huge player in the gaming industry today. One of Crane's initial claims to fame was being the designer for the classic Atari 2600 hit released by Activision named Pitfall. This vine-swinging and crocodile-jumping adventure was unlike anything else in 1982 on the Atari, and it sold over 4 million copies. And I can definitely see elements of Pitfall Harry and the two-level platforming design in A Boy and His Blob as well. But David finally got the chance to design and program an NES game along with his former Activision colleague Gary Kitchen, who is now the president of Absolute Entertainment, who developed A Boy and His Blob. Crane said the idea of the Blob was heavily inspired by the Hanna-Barbera characters Gloop and Gleep from the cartoon The Herculoids. I know David Crane never mentioned this, but I'm pretty sure he took a bit of inspiration from Indiana Jones for the game as well. I mean, the font style of the titles look pretty similar, and those first few bars from the title screen song are almost identical to Indy's theme. Crane realized how adventure games had evolved since Pitfall, and that now many of them rely on various items and tools you need to advance in the games. One thing he disliked was the item menus and their constant interruptions in gameplay. This is where the concept of the Blob transforming into the necessary items you need came to be. But when asked why he specifically used jelly beans as the means to cause these transformations, he simply stated, "Why not?" At the end of production, 14 different jelly bean flavors and transformations were put in the game. He understood this would be a little overwhelming to remember what all these flavors would correspond to, so he tried to use puns or alliteration to help you. like the licorice jelly bean starting with an L so it changes to a ladder, or vanilla sounding like umbrella. Normally it takes around 6 to 8 months for a team to develop an NES game. Crane developed The Boy and His Blob in the summer of 1989 in only 6 weeks, so he could meet the deadline of being able to present the game at the CES trade show in Chicago. He knew he was going to have to focus on nothing but this game to meet that demand, so he rented a room in a flop house near his office, working as much as 20 hours a day to finish the game. Crane said he remembers losing sleep over making sure he didn't forget little attentions to detail for the players, like having bubbles placed correctly in the water to give a more realistic feel to the game. All of Crane's hard work paid off because the game won Best of Show at the 1989 CES. And this award came just one day prior to the deadline to submit A Boy and His Blob to Nintendo for final approval. A Boy and His Blob, Trouble on Blobolonia, officially released in January of 1990 in North America, November 1990 in Japan, and 1991 in Europe. Let's take a look at the manual so I can give you a basic feel for the gameplay before I reveal my secret pro tips. So like I said earlier, you start out on Earth where you need to collect money and treasure to buy vitamins so you can poison the Emperor once you reach Blobolonia. You are only in direct control of the boy, and the blob follows close by as your sidekick. But if you do get separated, you can always whistle by tapping the B button and Blobbert will make his way to you. At the bottom of the screen are your different flavors of jelly beans you can feed the blob to make him transform. Here's a quick list of all the jelly beans and their transformations you can screenshot for quick reference. You may have noticed the manual lists the grape jelly bean, which actually didn't make it to the final game. The original use of this bean was to turn Blobbert into a wall and call it the Great Wall of China, which could repel enemies. Workers at Nintendo noticed that sometimes the boy would get separated from Blobbert, and no matter how much whistling or backtracking they did, they couldn't proceed any further and felt this was a major flaw in a game Nintendo otherwise loved. So Crane decided to scrap the grape bean and create a new jelly bean that would allow Blobbert to catch up to the boy at any time, and thus the mysterious ketchup-flavored jelly bean was born. You can toss a ketchup jelly bean at any time you're separated from Blobbert and he'll immediately appear, which is definitely handy, but don't abuse this feature. And don't try to feed a ketchup jelly bean to Blobbert either, because he doesn't like them. And that's one thing Blobbert and I have in common. We both hate ketchup. For real, it's about the only smell I can think of that will make me want to vomit, and my kids Blake and Emma and my wife love to torture me with it. Just check out this video they made of me playing Pie Face with ketchup a few years ago.
How much did he get, Mommy?
You can turn Blobbert into a brick if you feed him a honey jelly bean, and during his transformation, give him a ketchup jelly bean. This was a fun little nod to the Great Wall of China idea Crane had to begin with. Now that's pretty much all the gaming basics you need to know. So let's get to my secret pro tip so you can master A Boy and His Blob. My first pro tip is don't worry about finding all the treasure. Now yes, finding the treasure throughout the game is important for getting the vitamins, but don't be driving yourself crazy to find every piece, because that treasure counter at the top of the screen at first made me believe you had to have all the treasure before you could get the vitamins to fight it. Most of the times when I get the vitamins at the store, I still have a couple of treasure left that I didn't bother grabbing, because some of the treasures that near the pointy rocks in the water aren't the easiest to grab without losing a life. But don't confuse the treasure with the jelly bean bags. There are 2 jelly bean bags you need to find to get extra beans throughout the game. The first is on the left-hand side of this ledge in the subterranean region, and the other and most crucial is in the top left corner of the blue-colored stage just before you resurface from the subway. The reason this second one is so crucial is that this bag contains the lime jelly beans, which you must have to complete the game, which we will cover here in a bit. Pro tip number 2 is learning how to properly avoid those annoying subway serpents. You encounter quite a few of these during your time on Earth, and in my experience, you have a pretty narrow window to make it past these guys. Remember, there's no jump button in this game, and these guys will kill you with one hit. But I figured out a pretty fail-safe method of making it past them. They jump back and forth in a predictable arc, so I get as close as I can to where its head hits the ground closest to the boy, and as soon as its head reaches the ground at the furthest point away, I immediately dash to run underneath the serpent. Pro tip number 3 is the hole punch drop-through technique. When you use the punch-flavored jelly beans, Blobbert will turn into a manhole for the boy to fall through. But if you stay immediately under the hole you fell through and whistle for the blob, the hole will fall straight down on top of the boy and he'll immediately fall through to the next level. This can be both a blessing and a curse, because it can really help you if you need to escape an enemy. But if you're not careful, it can send you plummeting to your death, so choose wisely. Now the tangerine jelly beans, which transform Blobbert into a trampoline, are critical for making your way back to the surface on Earth and Blobolonia. And even more important is the proper placement of Blobbert and his trampoline, because if you veer only slightly off course of the trampoline on a high jump, you will miss the trampoline and die. But there is this one critical high jump you need to make in the subterranean region on Earth, where you have to jump multiple screens to a high ledge on the left. You need to place the trampoline in a very precise spot, and it's really frustrating to try to get Blobbert to this spot on his own. So feed him a cinnamon jelly bean so you can use the line in the middle of the blowtorch to place Blobbert on this exact spot here so you can safely reach the top. Pro tip number 4 is using the coconut jelly bean to scout multiple future screens and wipe out enemies on Blobolonia. Just have your coconut jelly bean selected to turn Blobbert into a coconut, then pick it up and start out from the far left of the screen, get a run and go, and throw the coconut just before you reach the right edge of the screen to send it rolling past several screens ahead. Once it stops, make your way right and whistle for Blobbert until he comes back to meet you. You can repeat this as much as necessary to make it through Blobolonia with little difficulty. Pro tip number 5 is definitely a spoiler alert if you haven't beat the game before. So I'm warning you because I'm going to tell you how to properly access the Emperor's Lair and defeat him with the vitamins. Once you've made it all the way to the end of the Blobolonia cave, you'll notice a keyhole on the right wall. Remember those lime jelly beans I said were critical? This is exactly why they're so important. You can feed Blobbert one of the lime jelly beans and he turns into a key. Pick it up and make your way to the Emperor's Lair. Once inside the lair, you'll notice the Emperor on the right side of the screen, and he has Blobbert in a cage in the center of the room with a jar of vitamins placed on a shelf near the Emperor. Select an apple jelly bean, which will transform Blobbert into a jack. Make a quick run and go from the left to toss it to Blobbert, and the jack will bust open the roof of the cage, spilling the vitamins on the Emperor to finally take him down and save all of Blobolonia. You'll get a quick thank you for your efforts, and you get to hang out with a Michelin Man for a bit. So those are my pro tips for a more legitimate playthrough of a Boy and His Blob. But there are a few glitches you can take advantage of to make it through faster. For example, a faster route to the Emperor's Lair goes like this. When you first reach Blobolonia, head all the way to the last screen on the left. Throw a jelly bean to the left side of the screen, and most of the time it won't do anything. But run back and forth and keep tossing jelly beans at the left side of the screen, and you may get lucky and trigger a glitch, where you can toss the bean at the screen where the final boss, the Emperor, is. You have to pay close attention because you'll only see the scene for a split second. Once you see this screen, head right, and pretty much all the enemies have now disappeared, and you can easily make your way to the Emperor's Lair to finish him off. A Boy and His Blob, Trouble on Blobolonia has received mixed reviews over the years. Electronic Gaming Monthly and IGN both gave it low scores, feeling it didn't live up to its full potential, being that the jelly bean concept felt gimmicky and was trying to make up for the mostly empty worlds with little enemies, and I really can't argue with them on that. But what's strange is IGN has A Boy and His Blob ranked 74th in its top 100 NES games of all time list. I mean, don't get me wrong, I obviously enjoyed this game, but I was pretty surprised it was that high on their list. I only started playing this game fairly recently, and it was suggested by a co-worker who really enjoyed it growing up. I have always enjoyed the trial and error style of puzzle adventure games like Dragon's Lair and Sega CD F&B games, so I felt right at home with this game. A sequel to the NES title was released on the Game Boy called The Rescue of Princess Blobette, and a contemporary reimagining of A Boy and His Blob was released on the Wii and other modern consoles more recently. So A Boy and His Blob has definitely left a sound legacy in gaming, and I'm glad my friend reminded me to try this one-of-a-kind NES title. Make sure to give this video a like and let us know in the comments below what you think about A Boy and His Blob. Special shout out to Hour A Day Gamer for finding Mullet Boy first for the second week in a row in our last Who is the Real Super Macho Man video. Till next time, guy. You obsessed with collecting all those Power Stars in Super Mario 64 back in the 90s like me? Then you're gonna love all the secrets and history I'm gonna share in this video. Let's get started. If this is your first time here at the channel, my name is Tyler, and if you love gaming from all generations like we do here at G3, then consider hitting that subscribe button and hit that bell for notifications so you don't miss anything. Can you remember exactly where you were when you saw the Nintendo 64 for the first time? I know I will never forget waiting in a line of about 10 kids in the electronics department at Walmart. All of our eyes were glued to a CRT monitor mounted on top of the video game display case. Of course, the game on the screen was Super Mario 64, and I was absolutely mesmerized. Like I've said before here on the channel, I didn't have a Super Nintendo growing up, so the last Mario game I had really played was Super Mario 3 on the NES. So to see a 3D Mario game was pretty mind-blowing. So my first memories of the game are running up that stone hill with the yellow arrows, and I remember thinking to myself how Mario's red and blue colors looked so vivid, and how surprised I was that maneuvering Mario with the control sticks felt so natural to me. The original concept for what ultimately became Mario 64 was actually brainstormed in the early 90s, 5 years before the release of the Nintendo 64. This was while director Shigeru Miyamoto was developing Star Fox for the SNES along with the Super FX chip creator Argonaut Software. Miyamoto dreamed of making a 3D Mario title using this new technology, with his initial idea based on a miniature 3D Mario world, but it didn't really get past the concept stages, and he decided to wait until the next generation before he really dived into another Mario title. Because he knew the new controller technology was going to have many more buttons, which would allow for a much better gameplay experience. There are urban legend style rumors of a Super Mario FX game that was in development back in the early 90s, but one of the Argonaut software engineers, Dylan Cuthbert, said these rumors were false and that Super Mario FX was just a code name used for the Super FX chip itself, and that no actual game had really been made. The development team, Nintendo EAD, previously known as Nintendo R&D 4, took around 3 years to bring Super Mario 64 to life, with the entire first year just consisting of concept and design, and the final 2 years being dedicated to actual software development. The directors were the already legendary Shigeru Miyamoto and Takashi Tezuka, along with Miyamoto's protege Yoshiaki Koizumi, who joined Nintendo in 1991. And it's no surprise the composer was Koji Kondo, who has so many masterful musical accomplishments in both the Mario and Zelda franchises. The team first came up with an isometric style for the game that had a similar look to Super Mario RPG, but they soon switched to a 3D open world style of gameplay, which forced the developers to tackle problems they never encountered before with Mario. Miyamoto discussed how prior to Mario 64, they were used to programming each Mario level pixel by pixel, and they had complete control over the number of pixels Mario could jump, and they would design levels based on precision platforming. But in a 3D environment, it's hard to tell precisely where Mario is with respect to the area you want to jump to, so they had to make the jumps more forgiving and less precise in order to make it a fair experience for the player. Since the jumping mechanics in Mario 64 were such a headache to program, it's one of the reasons they didn't incorporate a jump button into Ocarina of Time, which Nintendo EAD were actually developing at the same time as Mario 64. That's why there were so many puzzle Zelda-like elements in this Mario game, like the bookshelves and pyramid puzzles. Miyamoto was quoted saying, "For me, Mario and Zelda exist side by side. Their basic gameplay elements are the same, with the only difference being that one focuses on action and the other on puzzle solving. They're always developed at the same time, and lots of good ideas from Mario get used in Zelda, and vice versa." The other major 3D designing challenge was the ability of the player to take control of the camera, but I don't feel the developers took this challenge as a nuisance, because Miyamoto said he liked to think of Mario 64 as an interactive cartoon with customizable visuals and special fun Nintendo attentions to detail, like having Lakitu be the in-game cameraman. And little did they know they were pioneering camera mechanics that would inspire many future successful developers. Mario's motions were now more versatile than ever in a 3D world, and special attention was made to just make moving Mario around a fun experience. Most of Mario's motions are centered around his hips, which allows for exaggerated movements when going in any direction, like leaning forward heavily when he accelerates. Miyamoto says Mario's movements are similar to Arale Norimaki, who is a popular and energetic anime character from the Slump series. Mario had nearly 250 different motion patterns animated and programmed by Yasunari Nishida and Yoshiaki Koizumi, and 193 of them made it into the final game. And you can also thank Koizumi for another critical design to help with players' depth perception of controlling Mario, and that was the round shadow added underneath each object in the game, including Mario, to help make sure you were in the correct spot in all 3 dimensions. Now, to test how Mario's animations and movements would interact with the 3D environment, the team used a golden rabbit named Mips, who actually made his way into the final game as that annoying rabbit you had to chase around and get a secret star. MIPS is an acronym for the Nintendo 64's architecture processors, meaning microprocessor without interlocked pipeline stages. Development continued until November of 1995 when a playable version of Super Mario 64 was presented as part of a Nintendo 64 premiere at Nintendo's trade show called Nintendo Space World. The game was only halfway completed at this point, but this version featured a whopping 32 courses, but the game looked a little crude since only 2% of the mapping was complete. The game had an overall positive response, but some players spoke of the controls as being, and I quote, wobbly and slippery. So this made Miyamoto and his team dig in and tighten those controls and finalize their first 3D Mario title for release the next year. They even had children come in and play test the game on the first bomb stage, with one of those kids being Miyamoto's son. As he watched his son not be able to make it to the top of the hill to fight the king, Miyamoto said, "Geez, does this kid have any brains? This guy is savage." Super Mario 64 was finally released on June 23, 1996 in Japan, September 29th in the US, and in Europe on March 1st, 1997. My parents knew I wanted the console for my birthday in September, but we couldn't find it anywhere in October and most of November. Finally, on Black Friday, shopping with my mom, we found a Nintendo 64 console and a copy of Super Mario 64 in a small local department store called Magic Mart. What made it even crazier was that I'd already came up empty at Babbage's and Toys R Us that day, and I really didn't even want Mom to stop at Magic Mart on the way home, but man, I'm glad she did. I still remember seeing that box behind the glass for the first time with Mario and his new flying wing cap, and that first vision of the giant 3D Bowser on the back of the box was so exciting. Can you believe I didn't throw away the instruction manual this time? It still looks pretty great today, and here are a few of the highlights. The story unfolds with Mario receiving an invitation from Princess Peach to come to the castle because she's baked him a cake. But once Mario arrives, he hears an ominous voice telling him no one's home, now scram. This could only be the work of Bowser. The story serves as both a narrative for the game and a quick tutorial on where to get started by telling you Mario searched all over the castle and was only able to find the largest painting he has ever seen, and he's drawn into it to discover the other world inside. He soon finds out that Bowser has kidnapped the princess once again and stolen the power stars which protect the castle, and Mario makes it his quest to recover all 120 of the power stars and save Peach once again from Bowser and his minions. Next, the manual introduces the opening screen with Mario's face that was specifically designed for players to get familiar with the new Nintendo 64 controller. There are great written and visual explanations of how to control Mario, and you're introduced to so many new moves that he was never capable of in the 2D games, like the triple jump, the side somersault, and my personal favorite, the long jump. I also enjoy the backward somersault too. That animation just always looks so smooth to me, and it's pretty crucial in nailing that top quarter jump into the wet dry world painting. You also learn the new swing mechanic used to fight Bowser, where you grab him by the tail and swivel that control stick in a circular motion to send him launching to a nearby ball. The manual reveals the castle contains 15 main courses, with each containing 6 power stars hidden in each one. There are also 15 secret stars hidden throughout the castle. And don't forget, you can get 100 coins in each course to get an additional power star to bring the total up to 120 stars. You're also introduced to the pink Bob-omb buddies, who you get to access hidden cannons throughout the game to launch Mario all over the place to find some power stars, and I have to admit, shooting Mario out of that cannon is quite a bit of fun. Mario also has access to 3 new caps in Mario 64. The red wing cap that allows you to fly, the green metal cap that has special abilities like walking on the ocean floor or invincibility to fire or toxic gases, and the blue vanish cap that allows Mario to pass through enemies, wire nets, or special walls. And don't forget, Mario can actually lose his cap in this game, like when that idiot bird named Klepto steals your hat in Shifting Sandland. And you better get it back, because Mario will take more damage without his lucky cap. You get a nice tip section at the end of the manual in case you run out of ideas on how to find the power stars, or if you're looking for some ways to save Mario's power, like ground pounding before you hit the ground if you fall from a high spot, so you'll take less damage. Now that we've tackled the development and basics for Mario 64, let's cover some of my favorite gameplay highlights, secrets, and Easter eggs. One of my favorite additions to Mario 64 was all the voice elements Mario has. And of course, he was voiced by the same actor who plays him even to this day, named Charles Martinet. I thought for years this was the first time Martinet voiced Mario in a game, but it was actually the second. The first game Martinet took on the role of our favorite Brooklyn plumber was in the 1995 PC title called Mario's Game Gallery. The game was a compilation of generic games published by Interplay, where you play dominoes, checkers, and go fish against Mario. I have to admit the voice quality and graphics were surprisingly pretty good, and it's definitely not as bad a game as I thought it was going to be. But we all know Martinet exclaiming, "It's me, Mario!" in Super Mario 64 is what made this man a living legend. Now my friends and I always speculated that when you collected all 120 stars that it had to unlock some special secret. And we all agreed that mystery cannon with a grate over top of it in front of the castle was probably connected to that secret. We figured you could shoot yourself on top of the castle and find Luigi, but now we all know it's actually Yoshi that's up there. But more on Yoshi here in a bit. But there was actually more controversy surrounding Luigi being a part of Mario 64. In the courtyard in the back of the castle where you enter Big Boo's haunt, there's a fountain that has a star-topped statue with an illegible inscription underneath. Some people believe it reads L is real 2401 and thought the L stood for Luigi and he could somehow be unlocked in the game. Others think it's some prophecy pertaining to Luigi being in Paper Mario, which didn't release until February 5th, 2001. But in a written response letter from Nintendo when a fan asked about the inscription back in 1998, they said the programmers put the inscription in there as a joke. Oddly enough, the inscription made it into the Ocarina of Time as well. Some people believe the inscription simply states Eternal Star, which in all honesty seems legit to me. Luigi was originally supposed to be in Mario 64, where they wanted to have Mario and Luigi start in separate areas of the castle and eventually make their way through together. But Miyamoto said it ultimately came down to memory issues and Luigi's part had to be scrapped. Now Yoshi was originally supposed to have a small part in the game as well, but the team wasn't satisfied with the end result and it didn't make the final cut either. But they didn't want to waste all that hard work they put into making a 3D model of Yoshi, so that's why they made him appear at the top of the castle at the end of the game. But visiting Yoshi isn't the only secret you unlock when you get all the power stars. For starters, Yoshi gives you 100 lives and you will now have a glitter effect when you perform a triple jump. And if you go back and defeat the final Bowser in the sky, he has a few new messages for Mario when he figures out he's collected all 120 stars. And for whatever reason, the penguin you race in Cool Cool Mountain is now ginormous and poses a much more difficult challenge for Mario to race. And did you ever take time to look at the pillars just before that final fight with Bowser? There are a few etchings on the pillars that look like a throwback to a very familiar boss fight on the NES. What I find so fascinating about this game is how it was such a great visual and technical accomplishment at the time, and the development team didn't really know exactly what kind of system the N64 was going to be. Miyamoto discussed how the development of Super Mario 64 was taking place at the same time the Nintendo 64's hardware was. This meant that the team had to use another computer to basically guess how the 64's technology was supposed to work. And luckily everything came together when they finally got a working demo to test the game with. Miyamoto said, "That's why I say this, and it's no exaggeration, but we only used about 60% of the N64's capabilities in this game. No, actually, if you look at everything, maybe only 40. Since developing the game entailed so much guesswork, there are a massive number of glitches that people way more intelligent than me have uncovered over the years, but I have a couple favorites. First are the multiple ways gamers have been able to access the awesomely named Black Room of Death. This is actually a small space located in the loading zones of the game that players aren't supposed to be able to access, with some of them being actually impossible to exit without resetting the console. My favorite glitch is to watch people perform the backwards long jump tricks, or BLJ tricks as the cool kids call them. For example, if you have 16 stars and perform this maneuver through the upstairs power star door in the endless staircase, you can make it to the final Bowser fight with only a few stars. This glitch works on the original Japanese, US, and European versions, but this glitch was actually patched in the updated 1997 Japanese Super Mario 64 Shindao version, which added other significant changes like Rumble Pack support and all of the Mario voice acting that was included in the US and European versions, but not the original Japanese release. And my favorite Easter egg is one that was allegedly found for the first time 20 years after the game's initial release, and it's located in Bob-omb Battlefield. As you first make your way up the mountain to face King Bob-omb, you probably noticed the giant balls you had to avoid near the base of the mountain. And on your first trip up, there are only 2 balls moving around the pit. But once you defeat the king and come back to this area, there are now 3 balls, which means that the king has lost his royal status, and even the pink cannon guys will confirm that Big Bob-omb is nothing but a big dub now. And the next time you feel like taking down Bowser and are watching the game's end credits, make sure you have another controller plugged in the second port, because you can actually move the camera with your control stick to experience the ending in your own way, much to Miyamoto's delight. Mario 64 is one of those games where
What
I
is
believe
the
we will
best
always
dog?
be finding more secrets and glitches we can all enjoy. Super Mario 64 was the highest selling Nintendo 64 game, and over 11 million copies have been sold. It's also one of the best reviewed games of all time, receiving multiple 9 or higher out of 10 scores from major gaming publications and a perfect 10 out of 10 score from Edge magazine. It's on numerous best games of all time lists, and its popularity extends well beyond the 90s, like the Super Mario 64 DS launch title from 2004, where you can actually play as Mario, Yoshi, Luigi, and Wario. And Super Mario 64 was the second most popular virtual console game on the Wii by 2007, only second to the original Super Mario Bros. On the NES. But what if I told you playing Super Mario 64 could be critical for your health? Well, according to a Public Library of Science article, playing Super Mario 64 for 6 months seemed to improve memory and actually increase the amount of gray matter in the brains of older adults from ages 55 to 75, especially the hippocampus, which is critical for memories and may potentially help improve memory-related symptoms in conditions such as Alzheimer's disease. I'll put a link in the description if you want to check out the full article. So remember, if anyone ever gives you a hard time about playing Super Mario 64, just tell them this game is scientifically proven to not rot your brain. Make sure to like this video and leave a comment about some of your favorite Super Mario 64 secrets and memories. And we want to give a shout out to Go Fast Daddy for finding Mullet Boy hidden in the VHS case in our last Pixel Rip 1989 video. Till next time guys, G3 out. Hey look, you made it to the end of the video. I've had a few people ask if there was any way we could support the channel, and I wanted to let you know we do have a Patreon account that you can access with the link here at the top of the screen, or the one I'll put in the description. I don't like talking about this kind of stuff, and no one's obligated, but I'm just giving you the option if you're interested, and all proceeds will always go back into bringing you better content here at G3. Have a good one guys, and thanks for watching.
This is GTV, the leader of the next generation. On November 21st, 1990, Nintendo of Japan entered a new era. This day saw the debut of the new 16-bit Super Famicom, a machine that was a quantum leap forward. Never had a home video game machine had the features that were on the Super Famicom. Scaling sprites, rotating backgrounds, orchestrated sound, a massive palette of colors, and a new controller with 6 action buttons. On that first day, only 2 games were available for the Super Famicom, which were equally groundbreaking: F-Zero and Super Mario Bros. 4 Super Mario World. For the first time, Nintendo could truly deliver the adventure for Mario they had always envisioned. And for the player at home, a massive, immersive... This is GTV. Are you up to it?
Last Christmas, the world felt its first sonic boom when Sonic the Hedgehog 1 sold more than 1 million copies and became the most popular video game of 1991.
What was once unthinkable became the new reality. Sega displaced Nintendo as the #1 video game company in the United States of America,
Dominating the industry with over a 60% share of the market.
For the second round of this console war, Sega doubled down on its efforts, delivering a new Sonic adventure that would become the apex of the 16-bit era, creating a marketing strategy along the way that established the status quo.
I mean, it's comparable to the launch of Madonna's sex book, Sonic Tuesday.
To learn how it all happened, stay here. This is the Sonic Tuesday story.
Sonic 2 is super.
January 1992, the dust had settled from the 91 Christmas shopping season. Millions of game fans across America returned to school or work, having made the choice between the Sega Genesis or the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Only one stood as the winner. Beginning in 1992, Sega started a multi-year run as the market leader of the video game industry in the United States. Just a few years prior, this scenario would have been treated as a piece of laughable fiction.
It may be the most addictive toy in history, Nintendo video games.
In 1988, Nintendo was such a hot brand that its most popular games were in very short supply. Consumers were forced to line up for hours, often going home empty-handed. In 1989, the most anticipated game of the day, Super Mario Bros. 3, was featured in a Hollywood film, The Wizard. Many bought a ticket just to get a preview of the game. In 1990, Super Mario Bros. 3 broke all existing sales records. Without argument, it was the greatest game of the 8-bit era. Then, after years of rumors, Nintendo's 16-bit machine debuted in 1991. The release of the Super Nintendo Entertainment System wasn't just meant to be the next big thing. It was expected to be a coronation. In those days, Nintendo was a de facto monopoly. Sega, and everyone else, split a single-digit market share, while over 90% went to Nintendo. Most in the industry predicted that the king of the 8-bit hill would simply walk all over the competition once more. But Sega took the opportunity to knock Nintendo from its throne. Rather than fight for Nintendo's share of the proverbial pie, they expanded it and made one of their own. Sega released the Genesis 2 years before Nintendo's Super NES. Sega targeted older, more sophisticated game players. Sega recruited celebrities and athletes to give their games relevance to the culture. Sega openly mocked Nintendo in advertising while touting the power of the Genesis.
What Nintendo?
Then, in 1991, Sega released Sonic the Hedgehog. The game became the company's flagship title. The Sonic character became the face of Sega. Sonic was positioned as a faster, cooler alternative to Mario. The coup de grace came in July 1991. Sega reduced the price of the Genesis to $50 less than the Super NES and included Sonic for free with each new unit sold. The end result was 2.8 million Genesis sets sold in 1991, while the Super NES only sold 2 million. The sales tally justified Sega's hard work, while Nintendo was left stunned, relegated to second-place status. 1991 was just the first battle of that long, drawn-out war between Sega and Nintendo. 1992 would be just as competitive as the year before. Another 1-2 punch was needed to keep Sega on top and Nintendo on guard. A sequel to Sonic, one bigger, faster, and better than the original. In the late 1980s, nearly every home video game was made in Japan. Nintendo, based in the old capital of Kyoto, controlled the American gaming industry with an iron fist, deciding which games get released as well as how many. For many games from Japan, the differences in culture and language led to experiences that were not as satisfying to American audiences as they were to Japanese ones. In 1990, newly recruited Sega of America CEO Tom Kalinske addressed this problem. He created a new software division in California, SEI, the Sega Technical Institute. Mark Cerny, a man who had programmed several Master System titles for Sega, was placed in charge of proper American game development. The idea behind STI was simple. Games developed in America, by Americans, for Americans, would fare better than games that were developed in Japan, then translated and sent overseas. The original Sonic the Hedgehog was the first popular video game in many years that had any input from Americans. Though stateside involvement was minor, the back and forth between the Japanese and US Sega offices brought out qualities in Sonic that Americans would find appealing, and whittled away Japanese ideas that just wouldn't work in the US. As the leader of STI, Mark felt it could be beneficial to have seasoned Sega talent from Japan working alongside the American team, expertise and guidance. The first player of STI drafted from Japan was Hirokazu Yasuhara, Carol Yas, one of the key players in the creation of the original Sonic the Hedgehog. As for the other key creator of Sonic, Mark learned that Yuji Naka, the lead programmer, had left the company. Yuji had several reasons for quitting Sega in Japan. Long working hours, low pay, and the feeling of not having his work properly recognized were at the top of the list. Mark convinced Yuji to return to Sega on the American side by doubling his salary and granting royalties on game sales. Sonic 2 was not yet on the drawing board, but it was the obvious choice for the first game to make with Yuji and Yas at STI. In September 1991, Mark approached the Japanese heads of Sega, offering to take up the task of producing a second Sonic in time for Christmas of 1992. Much to his surprise, the offer was rejected, the reasoning being that it was far too early to plan for a sequel. At the time, Sonic had just been released, and its future success had not yet happened. Without much choice, STI went back to work on projects already in development. 2 months later, Mark was informed by his bosses in Japan that he was given the green light to produce Sonic the Hedgehog 2. One positive STI had on their side for a project with a tight deadline was that Sonic and most gameplay mechanics were already created. This core could have a number of ideas applied to it quickly to see what worked and what didn't. In the original game, Sonic was given an artificial speed limit. Sure, he was fast, but could have gone faster. In Sonic 2, the speed limit was raised. If Sonic somehow lost his momentum by hitting a wall or colliding with an enemy, the player could get right back into the action with a new feature, the spin dash. Holding down on the B button in combination with any jump button would rev up Sonic and launch him forward at full speed, as if he had never missed a beat. Graphics were a top priority for the team. STI attempted to bring 3D modeling to Sonic 2. The background graphics would take advantage of dithering and shading, a feature often seen in Genesis software. These techniques made objects look smoother and less pixelated, giving the impression there are more colors on the screen than there actually are. These programming tricks work best on low-style cathode ray tube television and oftentimes are not visible on modern sets. The design of Sonic had changed slightly from the original game, having a rounder look. The curves of his face and body made Sonic look a bit more realistic compared to most characters at the time. His coloring had slightly changed, giving the appearance of shading and depth. The end result gave Sonic 2 a realistic tone that looks more like a sculptured diorama than a pixelated video game. The bonus areas were reworked from the ground up, keeping with the goal of outshining the Super NES wherever possible, led to the creation of a fast-moving 3D tunnel. Nintendo had touted a feature cryptically named Mode 7 that allowed for scaling and rotating graphics, controlled directly by the Super NES hardware. The Genesis was capable of visuals, however, that had to be programmed on a game-by-game basis. The graphical style showed that despite being 2 years older, Sega's machine could deliver the same visual experience that Nintendo had. The gameplay of each bonus area is simple. Run through the course, collecting rings. At various intervals, Sonic will pass a checkpoint. If the amount of rings are over a set limit, the stage continues. If not, the stage ends. The rings are laid out in patterns. Sonic must move 360 degrees to the left or right to collect them all. Badniks block the way in some areas. Getting hit by one will cause you to lose some rings. If the number of rings held is over the amount required when Sonic reaches the goal line, he receives a Chaos Emerald. In Sonic 2, the gateway to the Special Zone has been moved to the star posts that appear in several places in each act. These serve as a save point in both the original and second Sonic. Passing one with 50 rings or more will open the bonus gateway. If you fail to get a Chaos Emerald, you can simply get 50 more rings and try another star post somewhere else in the app. This gives the player many more chances to get all of the Chaos Emeralds and secure the best ending. When Sonic holds all of the Chaos Emeralds and 50 rings or more, he can transform into Super Sonic. In this state, Sonic is as fast as possible and invincible. The rings act as a countdown timer, letting the player know when the superpower will expire. With enough skill, Sonic can make it to the end of each act with ease, while still super. If the original Sonic the Hedgehog had any obvious weakness against Super Mario World, it was that the game was limited to only one player. Mario games always offered two-player gameplay, usually alternating. Hirokazu Yasuhara brainstormed ideas that would fix the one advantage that Mario clearly had over Sonic. He had thought about households with many children, and how frustrating it was to have to sit out and wait your turn. A two-player mode would give siblings a chance to play together, including a second player led to the creation of a new character, Miles Prower, aka Tails. As the plot of Sonic 2 was drafted, Tails was given a major role. After the events of the original game, Sonic took to the skies in his airplane, the Tornado. On one excursion, he discovered West Side Island. There, he met Tails. This two-tailed fox was a few years younger than Sonic and looked up to him as a hero. Sonic took Tails under his wing, teaching the youngster all that he knows. Eventually, Dr. Robotnik appears in search of the Chaos Emeralds once again, hoping to use their power to complete his outer space fortress, the Death Egg. Sonic takes Tails with him to join the fight against Robotnik once more, to retrieve the Chaos Emeralds and save the island. In Sonic 2, the team designed two separate ways to allow for Tails to be controlled as the second player. In the single player, Tails can run alongside Sonic, taking out Badnik. He has no reserve of extra lives and is invincible. If Tails takes a hit from the enemy and gets left behind by Sonic, he will catch up, reappearing moments later. If the player controlling Tails stops playing, AI takes over until the controller is picked up again. The two-player mode allows Tails to challenge Sonic in 4 specific zones under certain conditions, such as clearing the zone fastest or collecting the most rings. The two-player mode shows off a stunning graphical feat for the time, as each player gets their own portion of the screen, utilizing an interlaced display mode not often used on the Genesis. Sonic's and Tails' points of view can both be seen at the same time. For the music, STI stayed with original Sonic team composer, Masato Nakamura, of the band Dreams Come True. With the aid of 6 programmers and assistants, Masato was able to craft a wholly new, original soundtrack that captures the mood of each stage. On September 25, 1992, the final version of Sonic 2 was completed. The game code was flown to Japan for mass production. The higher-ups at Sega were so nervous about the code being lost in transit that 2 individual copies were sent to Japan on separate airplanes. Both arrived without incident. For the next few weeks, Sega would manufacture millions of copies of Sonic the Hedgehog 2 for the Genesis and Mega Drive. Nearly 2 months later, those cartridges would leave the factory. For a rendezvous with history.
Obviously not as fast as Sonic Death. He wanted me to become like
Throughout 1992, while Sonic the Hedgehog 2 was in development at STI, the marketing division at Sega got to work, making it known to the world that a Sonic sequel was on the way. Al Nilsson led the marketing department at Sega and was responsible for much of the promotion and brand awareness of the original Sonic in the United States. Sega hired the services of advertising agency Goodby, Silverstein, and Partners. The search was not taken lightly, with the firm winning out over larger, more established candidates. Goodby, Silverstein, and Partners was tasked with taking an already popular brand in Sega and Sonic and somehow make it even more popular. A strategy was embraced that treated Sega as the alternative, a secret club that was the cool place to be. The firm developed two slogans that would put everything Sega had built up over the last 3 years into memorable sound bites that are still remembered today. Welcome to the next level. The other encapsulated the rebellious nature of being part of the underground, the Sega Scream. $10 million was allotted for promotion and advertising. Campaigns were drawn up for television and print that would flood the zone throughout 1992. The plans became so grand that it would soon become obvious. The biggest product launch of the year wouldn't be good enough. This had to be the biggest of all time. Sega would announce the release of Sonic 2 well in advance, and that future date would be the same everywhere around the world. It was something that hadn't been attempted in a decade. In 1982, Atari Inc. held a large-scale event to celebrate the release of Pac-Man for the Atari 2600, released nationwide on April 3, 1982. Events were held in over 20 cities around the United States, except that Atari had released the game the previous month in other cities that did not hold a Pac-Man Day event. Copies of the game appeared everywhere before the April 3rd rollout. Even the media got the jump on Atari.
This week, it hit the home video game market.
While Pac-Man was the best-selling game of its day, the misfire of Pac-Man Day was a bit like rain on Atari's parade. When Nintendo dethroned Atari a few years later, an event of such a grand scale was not their policy. Nintendo of America preferred a slow burn strategy where games were released without much notice or fanfare. True, they advertised their games once available, but the brand was so hot, word-of-mouth advertising did most of the work.
He's back. All you had to do was ask.